Can you beat Borderlands 2 only using Zero's Bloodshed skill tree? Of course you can. But the real question is it worth it? Zero does have 3 skill trees: Cunning, Sniping, and Bloodshed. The Sniping skill tree rewards patience and planning. It stacks critical hit and gun damage. Pair that with a Jacob Sniper and your damage scales beautifully. And of course, there's Bore, a skill that turns collateral shots into absolute insanity. Bloodshed, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. This tree is more so about getting up close and personal, relying heavily on melee damage with only a small amount of gun damage sprinkled in there. And honestly, it's probably my least favorite Zero playstyle, or anyone's playstyle for that matter. So today I'm running through the entire Borderlands 2 main story, only putting skills into Zero's Bloodshed tree, no exception. Now, before we get started, I laid out a few ground rules to keep things simple. I can only invest skill points into the Bloodshed tree. I must complete the entire Borderlands 2 main story. This doesn't include DLC or TVHM. I'm allowed to use guns since Bloodshed does have a few skills that boost gun damage, and this isn't only a melee challenge. With that out of the way, let's see how the run actually went. At the start of the run, Zero doesn't have access to any skills, and won't until level 5. Luckily, the early areas of Borderlands 2 have the training wheels firmly on. Enemies are fairly squishy, and gearbox weapons will do most of the heavy lifting. Now yes, I am using a sniper rifle early on, which I know is basically sacrilege for this video, but don't worry, it doesn't last long. I need all the help I can get anyways. Once we hit level 5, we unlock Deception. This ability lets Zero turn invisible and deploy a decoy, while also granting a damage boost to your next attack. This will increase the longer you stay cloaked. Deception can also double as a panic button when things start to go south. As we start putting points into Bloodshed, the build finally begins to take shape. Skills like Killing Blow quickly become favorites. Killing Blow massively boosts melee damage against low health enemies. While some sources claim low health means 50%, in my experience it felt closer to 30 or 35%. If anyone knows the exact number, let me know down in the comments. What makes Killing Blow so strong is that it scales based on percentage and not raw health, making it incredibly effective against tanky enemies. And then there's Iron Hand, which increases melee damage and max HP. On paper, it sounds great. Zero is a glass cannon, so more health should help, right? But without class mods, it caps out at only 15% for both bonuses, which just didn't feel very impactful early on. This might be better in later playthroughs, but personally, I wouldn't recommend it for the first run. Instead, I leaned into Be Like Water. This skill boosts melee damage after shooting and gun damage after meleeing, up to 30% melee and 20% gun damage. It creates a great synergy between guns and melee without locking you into a single playstyle. Combining Be Like Water with Deception to close distance, then finishing with Killing Blow, allowed me to put some genuinely big numbers out. Overall, if you've played Borderlands 2 before, levels 1 through 15 are a breeze, regardless of build. Things really started clicking after rescuing Roland from the Bloodshot stronghold. Up to this point, I was still learning how Bloodshed wanted me to play. Deception stopped being a panic button and became a positioning tool, which made a huge difference. The next thing I did was spec'd into Follow Through, a kill skill that boosts movement speed, gun damage, and melee damage. At max rank, it grants 40% movement speed, 30% gun damage, and 40% melee damage. Keeping Follow Through active while mobbing was a lifesaver, and helped me scale without relying on overpowered gear. Then I realized I'd missed something huge. Execute. Execute lets Zero lunge up to 3 meters towards an enemy and applies a 2 times melee damage multiplier. This quickly became my go-to opener for big damage combos. When paired with Killing Blow and other melee bonuses, the synergy is incredible, though it does take some setup and planning. Despite the damage boosts, enemies were clearly getting tougher. Zero still has almost no way to meaningfully increase max HP, which really reinforces the glass cannon feeling, especially when you're forced into melee range. This is where strategy and positioning became critical. I died. A lot. Before realizing I wasn't playing badly, I just wasn't adapting to the build. Timing Execute correctly, ensuring Killing Blow procs, and managing Deception usage all became essential. Poor positioning could easily ruin an engagement. Once I spec'd into Backstab, positioning mattered even more. At 5 points, Backstab grants a 40% melee bonus when attacking enemies from behind. though it's a bit finicky since it's based on foot orientation and not torso direction. This makes certain enemies awkward to deal with, but when it works, it really works. The mid-game itself wasn't brutally difficult, it was more so just a learning curve. Late game is where the cracks really started to show for this skill tree. Enemy health and damage continued to scale, and my lack of survivability became a serious problem, especially in areas like the wildlife preservation, where stalkers were particularly painful thanks to their invisibility and erratic movement. Elemental skags didn't help either. Shock skags shredded my shields and health faster than I could recover. At this point, I had access to Resurgence, which restores up to 20% of Zero's HP upon melee kill, scaling more aggressively at low health. And in hindsight, yeah, I absolutely should have taken it. But instead, I opted for Like the Wind, which grants up to 15% gun and melee damage just for moving. No conditions, no setup. I was blinded by the damage numbers, and it cost me. Engagements became all or nothing. I either barely survived, or I died and retried. This is where the build started losing points for me. Hero's Pass was my breaking point. I was only level 29, which one level under-leveled, and the area lacks good cover. Strong enemies everywhere, including a level 32 super badass loader that forced me to cheese parts of the area just to progress. This was where the challenge truly started to push back. By the time I reached the Warrior's Vault, I was nervous, and for good reason. The Warrior spends most of the fight out of melee range, meaning I couldn't use about 90% of the Bloodshed tree. Deception was nearly useless due to area of effect attacks and not being able to see his crit spots. My Fire Lyuda was ineffective, shotguns couldn't reach, and eventually a Jacob's Revolver saved the run thanks to its critical damage and accuracy. The fight was long, messy, and brutal, but after slowly chipping away, I finally brought the Warrior down and finished off Jack with Execute, which felt extremely fitting. Alright, so I've put an unhealthy amount of time into Borderlands 2, and this run genuinely made the game feel fresh again. With hundreds of builds and playstyles, it's no wonder I'm still playing this game nearly 14 years after it came out. That said, Bloodshed Zero is one of the most punishing ways to play. The only thing worse might be a true melee-only run. Late game felt borderline unbearable at times. I didn't reach the capstone skill, which could have helped significantly, and better optimization, like obviously using Resurgence or Slag, probably would have improved my experience. Still, it was refreshing to step away from brain-off builds like Salvador and actually thinking about positioning and strategy. Overall, I would probably give this build a 6 out of 10 rating. It's not overpowered, it's not unplayable, just aggressively mid. If you made it this far, consider dropping a like, and maybe even subscribing. And if you want to see this build taken to max level or through the DLCs, let me know in the comments. With all that said, y'all have a good one. Later.